thin blue waters flow, where westward currents go, rests the wooden hull and planking of a craft. Quiet watch now, embracing fore and aft. Deadly gales, relentless blow, took her down to lay below.
Shipwrecks in the Great Lakes are very uniquely situated, and they're preserved incredibly well compared to most shipwrecks in marine environments. And it's basically because there's no salt in the water and there are no critters in the water that directly eat these kinds of things. The shipwrecks here that are from the middle 19th century, some are literally intact, just as if they can still sail again if you took the water out of them. The masts are still standing, the rigging's still in the mast, the artifacts may be distributed about the deck or in the cabin, and it's a fantastic opportunity to see vessels like this that are so well preserved.
In 1981, Chuck Feltner realized this preservation firsthand as he discovered a sailing vessel just west of the Mackinac Bridge that hadn't been seen since 1856.
It certainly was a great thrill to go down in the water and see this big looming object and realize that you're the first human being that's been there with the Sandusky in 120 years.
Located near the top of Lake Michigan, the Sandusky rests in 80 feet of water. History records that a small 110-foot twin-masted ship sailed into the straits during a large storm. At least one ship reported seeing the Sandusky with sail damage as it passed Beaver Island.
I know she was bound from Chicago to Buffalo with grain and a crew of 7, and she encountered a gale and simply went down in the straits. And it isn't clear if there was damage to the hull or if she just capsized and went down. That's not entirely common, but apparently the crewmen were able to cling to the masts. Even after the ship went down, the masts were standing out of the water. But because of the weather, no other vessels were able to render assistance, and they were all fighting for their own survival.
Somebody reported it out there with these people on it, and a vessel was sent from Mackinac Island out to see if they could help them out. And they made one pass at it. When they came back, the guys were gone.
This sad reality was realized as divers explored the wreck for the first time.
We were on the bottom looking around, and then I saw this upturned boot, and it was stuck in the sand. And of course I thought it was just a boot. And then I remember, and he was with me, and I tried to pull it out, and then I realized that it wasn't coming out. And of course I didn't do anything else with that boot. That certainly brought home the significance of what happens to these shipwrecks when people go down with the ship.
The Straits has an impressive collection of shipwrecks, from steel vessels to schooners. But this new find had something no other wreck had, and divers were eager to see it for themselves.
The figurehead of the ram's head, is what I think it is, was something that I'm not sure you could see anywhere in the Great Lakes. It was just so magnificent.
It makes the Sandusky very unique. It was an early shipwreck, it went down in the 1850s, so it was a little bit finer than the later canal-sized schooners that came about that were a bit more utilitarian and not quite as fancy. Very few of the sailing craft around the Great Lakes have figureheads or scroll heads or anything like this anymore, with a few exceptions.
Only 3 years after its discovery, Sandusky was now a major attraction for divers. Chuck feared that most of the wreck would be stripped, and apparently the scroll figurehead was one of the targets.
We were told by some of the people involved that it was very loose, and some guy took it off, saying that, well, if it stayed that way, somebody's going to steal it.
In 1989, divers returned a replica figurehead to the Sandusky, carved by Tony Gramer and Bill Covington. This was a major shift in diver attitudes toward shipwrecks, where divers spent tens of thousands of dollars to preserve a wreck rather than loot it. Legislators also moved in the late 80s to better protect underwater resources.
In 1929, basically the state had passed a provision that said that they were going to try to protect antiquities. And that provision kind of was all-encompassing. It just said anything under control by the state. And that included, burial sites on land. And it kind of didn't specifically earmark the treasures within our Great Lakes. It wasn't until later on that we specifically earmarked shipwrecks and bodies within the Great Lakes system that were protected. July 2nd of 1980, we had a cutoff date that said that if any items was taken prior to that, they were permissible. But anything after that particular date, you needed to have a permit to take anything, or it was illegal to remove from the Great Lakes or the preserve system.
Further enhanced in 1994, Public Act 451 made it a misdemeanor to remove historical artifacts from the bottomlands, which includes Lake St. Clair. Michigan also created a network of preserves surrounding the state, with Alger and Thunder Bay enacted in 1981, the Straits and Thumb area in 1985, and Whitefish Point in 1986. Since that time, 13 preserves have been created to protect shipwrecks all around the peninsulas.
Penalties can be pretty substantial. Basically, if you remove an artifact, it's a misdemeanor, and it carries a fine of up to $500 and 6 months in jail. But if it's from a preserve system, or if somebody has been convicted of doing that before, that penalty can be enhanced to be a felony, a 10-year felony and a $15,000 fine, and anything that they use in the conveyance to take that artifact illegally can be seized. So their boat, their dive gear, all those types of items can be seized.
Seizure of equipment is enough to keep diver charter operators on the lookout for clients who may take artifacts during their visits.
I have had to tell people to put spikes back down. Yeah, they come up with a spike, and what you doing with that? Please put it back where you found it. And it's not there to be taken. And I'm not going to risk my my boat and my license and my livelihood because you want to take an iron spike from old shipwreck.
I think the community as a whole understands that there's a very unique historical value to our underwater wrecks and things of that nature. So part of our mission is not only to educate the public, but also to protect it. Last year, our officers dedicated 900 hours toward shipwreck protection out on the Great Lakes, all the way from Lake Michigan all the way up to Lake Superior.
Most times, divers don't even know that they're doing damage, especially when they try to anchor their boat over a shipwreck.
Probably the number one cause of wreck deterioration now, as a cultural process, is anchoring damage.
New moorings have been proposed by the Michigan Underwater Preserve Council, which includes anchors like this one on Sandusky that screw into the bottom, keeping the line away from the shipwreck so that wave action and constant boat tension can't damage the historic vessel.
I think it's getting a lot better, and I think that the grassroots behind that was the local diving communities. And 30 years ago, a system of underwater preserves were established in the Great Lakes around Michigan, and that was established directly because of diver effort.
Michigan Underwater Preserve Council, or the MUPC, helps to harness the volunteers within the 13 individual preserves in the state to increase diver access and to help preserve and promote underwater resources.
30 years after its discovery, Sandusky still has some secrets to reveal. And those who found this unique brig hope it brings the same excitement that they felt when they first visited it.
They're a living museum down there, but they are so fragile after being underwater for so long. Touching anything is going to disintegrate what's left, and I would just hope and pray that the people in today's world, the divers, are, I feel, definitely preservation oriented, and they would not do things that would be detrimental to preserving the history of that wreck. And hopefully it'll last another 100 years for their children's children to be on to enjoy the history of the shipwrecks.
Many scuba agencies have specialty courses for diving on shipwrecks, emphasizing safety and especially buoyancy control and proper fin techniques.
We have artifacts that are coming back to the preserve, and we're putting them back on the shipwreck. These wrecks were found back in the 80s and 90s, and a person seeing it in 2012 is still seeing the same thing. And when I'm diving or they're diving in another 10 years, 20 years from now, that stuff is still going to be there.
You know, some of the wrecks have been here for a couple of hundred years already, but if you look at what we've been finding a lot around the Great Lakes now are submerged forests and these tree stumps that are rooted in the bottom when lake levels were considerably different. And the preservation of some of these stumps are fantastic, and many of them date to 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. So conceivably, shipwrecks in a fresh, cold water environment like this can last as long as those stumps have. So I mean, for literally thousands of more years. So it's our responsibility to try to help that along.
Wooden hull or iron seam, former sail or hissing steam, weather drowned or collision resting there. Let the ages hold them fast, safe in our care. Visit kindly in their sleep as their stories decades keep. Be sure the Great Lakes bottom hold wealth greater than chests of gold. In the Ghost Fleet, moored to death where divers go, watched and protected there, preserved in respectful care, where the sunlight turns the shadows into treasure, where the sunlight turns the shadows into treasure.